It was just after 5:00 a.m. on a quiet Tuesday morning, May 17, 2005, when a chilling 911 call pierced through the stillness of Alexandria, Kentucky. The voice on the line was frantic. A woman screamed that someone had broken into her home and shot her husband. Then, suddenly, the line went dead. Dispatchers tried to reconnect. Static. Nothing. Within minutes, law enforcement sped toward the remote, forest-lined log cabin nestled just outside the sleepy town. Alexandria was not used to this sort of chaos, a place where people still left their doors unlocked and waved at strangers. But this morning would change everything. When police arrived, they found Amy Bosley, mid-30s, disheveled, eyes wild, clutching her 2 children tightly in the front yard. She was in shock, trembling, her voice cracking as she repeated, over and over, "Someone broke in. They shot Bob." Inside the house was a scene straight out of a horror movie, but also strangely, suspiciously theatrical. Drawers yanked out, cabinets open, a shattered rear door with glass sprayed not inside, but outside. It was the kind of detail that seasoned investigators clock instantly. Because if someone breaks into a house by smashing glass, that glass usually ends up on the floor, not in the grass behind them. The bedroom was the epicenter of it all. There, next to the bed, kneeling as if caught mid-prayer, was the lifeless body of Robert Bosley, known to most as Bob. He had been shot multiple times. Yet oddly, only 2 shell casings were in the room. The rest, it seemed, had vanished. At first glance, the scene mimicked a robbery gone wrong. But as any veteran detective will tell you, real break-ins are messy in all the wrong ways. They do not stop to scatter pill bottles in the bathroom. They do not leave stacks of cash untouched on the counter. And they certainly do not stage chaos beneath the kitchen sink. The initial impression was unsettling. Something did not feel right. Amy claimed a man had broken in, a white male, she said, with a nasal voice, bad breath, and the smell of urine. It was oddly specific. She even showed small scratches on her chest, claiming they were from a struggle. But her demeanor, well, that told a different story. Let us pause here. In the early stages of a homicide case, especially one reported as a break-in, law enforcement is trained to ask one essential question: does the story match the scene? And in this case, it did not. There were inconsistencies, tiny ones, but they stack. Like how Amy claimed the intruder smashed the glass first, then the shots came. But her own children, questioned separately, would later recall the sound of gunfire waking them long before any glass broke. In a house where walls are thin and silence is sacred, kids remember things. They just do. Amy's narrative felt rehearsed, like someone trying to recall a dream that never happened. And yet, in the opening hours, police could not hold her. There was no murder weapon, no eyewitness, just a grieving wife and 2 terrified children. Outside, the quiet town of Alexandria erupted in whispered horror. Schools closed out of fear that a violent killer was on the loose. Rumors flew. Was it a jealous ex-employee, a botched drug robbery, or something darker? And so, the official story, at least for that first morning, was this: Bob Bosley, beloved businessman and father of 2, was the victim of a home invasion that turned deadly. But here's what no one knew yet. The house was not just a scene of tragedy. It was a stage, and the woman everyone believed was a widow may have been the director. To understand what truly happened that night, we need to rewind the clock not just to the hours before the shooting, but years prior. Because this was not a crime of passion. It was a crime of preparation. Robert Bosley was born in 1962 in Campbell County, Kentucky. Raised in a God-fearing working-class family, Bob learned early on that nothing in life came easy. And he did not want it to. From chimney cleaning to roof repairs, he started with nothing and clawed his way up, gritty, determined, smart. Over time, his one-man operation became a regional powerhouse. Bosley Roofing and Chimney Sweep. Money followed. A lot of it. By his mid-30s, Bob was not just making ends meet, he was thriving. He owned an airplane, a fleet of luxury cars, and over 20 rental properties. But he did not stop there. He craved the rush, the lake parties, the jet skis, the freedom of success. He became known around Lake Cumberland not just for his work ethic, but for the wild parties aboard his massive boat. It was at a lakeside restaurant during one of these phases of indulgence where he met her, Amy Pave. She was 18, smart, ambitious, and working as a waitress to pay for community college. Bob was older, confident, and already wealthy. He swept her off her feet. Within 4 years, they were married. Amy traded in her modest upbringing for fur-lined coats, fine jewelry, and a front-row seat to the American dream. Soon, they had 2 children, Morgan and Trevor, and moved into a log cabin in the woods while building their dream estate nearby. To outsiders, they were the golden couple, successful, charitable, church-going. But on the inside, things were crumbling. Bob hated admin work, hated being tied down to ledgers and tax forms. So Amy took over the books. She was organized, educated, and had studied business. It made sense, at least on paper. But giving someone access to your life's work, the back end of your empire, requires one thing: trust. And Bob gave her all of it. While Bob was off managing properties or disappearing on the lake for entire weekends, Amy was quietly becoming the sole handler of company funds, payroll, and most dangerously, tax obligations. It started slowly, redirecting a letter, ignoring a deadline. Then one day, she stopped paying taxes altogether. Amy opened a private P.O. box that only she could access. The IRS never reached Bob, because they never had the chance. And when they finally called, Amy pretended to be Bob, reportedly speaking in a strange, high-pitched voice. The agent on the other end described it as a woman pretending to be a man. The illusion was slipping. But Amy kept stalling, hoping the government would back off, hoping she could buy more time. But the IRS never forgets. Eventually, a meeting was scheduled. Bob was to appear in person May 17, 2005, the same morning he was found dead. Coincidence? Or the endgame? Back in Alexandria, residents were terrified. Bob was well-liked, known to donate roofing services to struggling families, active in the church, present at school events. If someone like him could be gunned down in his own bed, no one felt safe. Local news ran headlines about a possible intruder. Police presence surged. Neighbors locked their doors for the first time in years. But even in the early days, law enforcement had doubts. There was no sign of forced entry except the staged rear door. No valuables were missing. The family dog had not barked. No vehicle tracks, no footprints, nothing. And Amy. Her wounds looked too clean, too symmetrical. A cut made by fear is ragged. A scratch made in panic bleeds differently. Investigators knew. They just needed proof. There is a myth we all love to believe that success brings peace. That if you just earn enough, buy enough, build enough, you can outrun the chaos of life. But the Bosleys proved something darker. You can live in a mansion and still be trapped in a crumbling story. Let us rewind. Bob Bosley was not born rich. He built his empire brick by brick, chimney by chimney, roof by roof. He was one of those rare men who did not fear long hours or dirty hands. He wore his work like a badge of honor. In the small town of Alexandria, Kentucky, people noticed. By the late 90s, Bob was not just a local business owner. He was a symbol of self-made success. His company, Bosley Roofing and Chimney Sweep, expanded rapidly. He bought rental properties, invested in luxury toys, and became something of a local celebrity. But money did not make Bob quieter. It made him louder. He was flashy. His lake parties were the stuff of legend, filled with music, alcohol, and women in bikinis. There were whispers, of course, about infidelity, about substance use, about how far removed his weekends were from his Sunday church appearances. And it was during this duality, this life split between success and indulgence, that Amy entered the picture. Amy Pave grew up working class. Her father struggled with alcohol, and her household, though loving, had limits. She was not handed much, so she made do. She studied hard, graduated high school with top marks, and enrolled in a local community college linked to Northern Kentucky University. She wanted to make something of herself. Working as a waitress to pay for tuition, she met Bob, older, confident, and with a kind of charisma that steamrolled resistance. He swept her into his world with promises and power. At first, Amy was just another party guest. But over time, she became the only one who mattered. After 4 years of dating, they married. For Amy, it was like stepping into a fairy tale. She left behind the noise of financial insecurity and entered a world of designer clothes, horses, and dream homes. She did not just marry a man, she married a lifestyle. They had 2 children. Morgan came first, then Trevor. The lake party slowed. Amy transitioned from party girl to PTA mom. To the world, they were living the American dream. But behind closed doors, cracks were spreading. As Bob's business grew, so did the paperwork. Taxes, payroll, vendors. It all annoyed him. He hated being chained to an office when the lake was calling. Amy, with her business studies, offered to help. Bob handed her the books. At first, it was practical. They were a team. A husband building from the outside, a wife managing from within. But gradually, Amy's control grew, and Bob, he became less present. Weekends often meant disappearing acts. He would vanish for days on the boat with vague explanations. Friends assumed he was blowing off steam, avoiding responsibility. Some suspected infidelity. And maybe that is where things began to break, not in some single betrayal, but in the slow erosion of trust. Bob trusted Amy with the business. Amy stopped trusting Bob with her future. That is when she made a decision. She stopped paying the IRS. It began with something simple. Diverting mail. Amy set up a private P.O. box under her name and had all IRS communications sent there. Bob never saw a single warning letter. When the IRS called, Amy answered. And in one chilling twist, she once pretended to be Bob, altering her voice to keep the ruse alive. The lie grew. Over the course of years, Amy embezzled nearly $2 million from the business by failing to pay taxes and funneling that money elsewhere. She used the company like a personal ATM, bleeding it while smiling in church pews and baking cookies for school events. Here's the cruel irony. Had she told Bob the truth, he might have bailed her out. He was wealthy. He could have negotiated with the IRS, but Amy was not interested in confession. She wanted control. She believed that if she could just stay ahead of the letter, she could keep everything. But time ran out. The IRS scheduled a face-to-face meeting with Bob for May 17, 2005, a meeting that would have pulled the veil off everything. Bob was about to find out, and Amy was about to decide how far she would go to make sure he did not. Here's where we pause for a moment, not just to reflect, but to understand something universal. This was not a spur-of-the-moment crime. It was not a heat of passion impulse. It was the result of a long, calculated descent. A woman who once studied business to escape poverty had now become a silent architect of fraud. She wore 2 masks: devoted mother, financial saboteur, and Bob, he was no saint. His lavish lifestyle, rumored affairs, and habitual absences created distance. But here's the thing. No matter how flawed he was, he did not deserve to die. That is the tragedy. 2 people once in love. One blinded by ambition, the other by indulgence. A life built together, now spiraling toward destruction. Amy was not just hiding debt. She was hiding resentment, anger, fear, and eventually, a loaded gun. The night before the IRS meeting, Bob went to bed in their log cabin, unaware that it would be his last. The children were tucked in. The house was quiet. Amy moved through the home, perhaps already rehearsing her performance. She knew what had to be done. She had the motive: fear of prison, loss of wealth, public humiliation. She had the means: access to Bob's personal gun collection. And, most chillingly, she had the opportunity. A remote cabin, a sleeping husband, no witnesses. What she did not realize was this: even the best staged lies fall apart under scrutiny. And in her desperation to cover her tracks, she would leave behind a trail: small mistakes, emotional cracks, and the testimony of 2 innocent children. They say the devil is in the details. In this case, the devil lived in a log cabin, wore soft house slippers, and knew exactly where the washing machine was. It was the early hours of May 17, 2005. Bob Bosley was asleep in bed. The children were tucked into their rooms. The home was quiet, eerily quiet, and that is when everything changed. Amy Bosley had a plan. Investigators believe she waited until her husband was deep in sleep. Then, she retrieved a pistol, likely one of Bob's own, from their private collection. The weapon had been handled before. There were no signs of forced entry, because there was not one. She was already inside. Standing at the edge of the bed, she raised the gun. She fired. Bob stirred, wounded but not dead. He tried to rise, confused and bleeding. He did not understand who would expect their spouse to be holding the trigger. But by the time he reacted, it was too late. Amy fired again, and again, 6 bullets in total. She did not flee. She did not cry. She did not call 911 immediately. Instead, she started acting. To sell the story of a break-in, Amy had to make it look like chaos. She moved from room to room, yanking drawers, opening kitchen cabinets, scattering pill bottles in the bathroom. She shattered the rear glass door with a metal baseball bat, later confirmed to be a family item. But she made a mistake. The glass fell. Outside. Anyone familiar with crime scenes knows, when you break in, glass falls inward. When you break out or fake it, it lands outside. It is a detail most would not notice. But forensic analysts always do. Amy did not stop there. In the laundry room, she stripped off her bloodied clothes. She placed them, along with a folded cloth containing 4 bullet casings, into the washing machine. She did not want to destroy them. She wanted to hide them just long enough to control the narrative. It was a reckless move, and it would become one of her biggest mistakes. Only after staging the home did Amy finally call 911. Her voice was frantic, panicked. But to a trained ear, panic sounds different when it is genuine. It lacks structure, coherence. Amy's call felt directed, like a rehearsal, and then it cut out. Police raced to the scene, believing they were tracking an armed intruder. K-9 units were deployed. A helicopter scanned the woods. Schools were closed across Alexandria, but there was no intruder, no signs of anyone entering or fleeing the property. The only footprints on the property belonged to the Bosleys. Still, Amy played the role. She told police that a strange man had broken in a white male, nasal voice, smelled like urine. She described being attacked and showed 2 scratches on her chest. But the wounds did not line up. They were too symmetrical, too shallow, like something made with scissors, not fingernails. And her blouse, it was not ripped. It was cut, then torn. A costume, not evidence. The real breakthrough did not come from DNA or forensics. It came from 2 voices, soft, confused, and heartbreakingly honest. Morgan and Trevor Bosley, just 9 and 6 years old, were questioned separately. They were scared but clear. They told detectives they were woken by the sound of gunshots. Not glass breaking, gunshots first. Then, later, the crash of glass. This small detail contradicted everything Amy had said. It was not just a minor inconsistency. It shattered her timeline. And children, as it turns out, remember truth better than liars do. Just hours after the murder, as detectives tried to piece things together, a team from the IRS arrived at the station. They had scheduled a meeting with Bob Bosley that very morning. They had been chasing him over a $1.7 million tax delinquency. And they were confused. Bob had never responded to letters or calls. Then one of the agents said something that made everyone stop. A few weeks earlier, they had spoken to Bob on the phone, but the voice did not sound right. It was high-pitched, artificial. The agent said it sounded like a woman pretending to be a man. That voice, they realized, was Amy. Now the motive was clear. By now, investigators were no longer asking whether Amy had done it. They were asking how long she had been planning it. The 6 bullets that struck Bob matched 6 casings. 2 found at the scene, 4 recovered from the washing machine. The gun, still missing. But that would not last long. According to later testimony, Amy's sister, who took custody of the children after the murder, discovered a handgun hidden in Amy's purse, tucked behind a wardrobe. The sister immediately contacted a lawyer, who turned it over to police. Ballistics confirmed it was the murder weapon. Amy had killed her husband with his own gun, hidden the evidence, and gone to sleep beside their children, knowing what morning would bring. Let us break this down. Over several years, Amy had diverted IRS mail to a secret P.O. box, embezzled nearly $2 million, lied to federal agents by impersonating her husband, hid gun casings in a washing machine, cut her blouse and her own chest to fake an attack. fabricated a story that nearly closed schools and terrified a town. All of this she did while attending school events, Sunday church services, and neighborhood barbecues. She did not wear guilt on her face. She wore pearls. And maybe that is what makes this case so chilling. The villain did not wear a mask. She wore a smile. The evidence was mounting. Bullet casings matched the gun. Children's testimonies destroyed the timeline. Her staged injuries were falling apart under scrutiny. And yet Amy Bosley still insisted she was innocent. She did not cry in the interrogation room, not the way grieving widows do. She showed confusion, disbelief, but not devastation. And when the detectives brought out the evidence, the casings found in the washing machine, the ripped blouse with clean-cut scissor marks, the testimony of her own children, she folded her arms, quiet, still claiming she did not do it. One of the most chilling pieces of the puzzle came from the family's washing machine. Inside, investigators had discovered not just bloodied clothing, but a folded cloth. Tucked inside were 4 spent bullet casings. Now think about that. If a killer broke into the house, shot the husband, panicked, and ran, why would they pause to hide casings in a cloth, walk to the laundry room, lift the washer lid, and drop them inside? They would not. But someone staging a crime scene would, especially someone trying to manipulate what police would find in a messy house. And let us not forget the aluminum baseball bat. It was found near the rear entrance. Amy said it must have belonged to the intruder. But lab analysis revealed 2 damning facts. The bat had fragments of glass matching the shattered door. It had white residue consistent with drywall from inside the Bosley home. It was not a weapon wielded in panic. It was a tool used to sell a story, and the story was collapsing. Amy had 2 scratches across her chest. She claimed they were from the attacker. But forensic specialists were immediately skeptical. The wounds were too symmetrical, too shallow, too clean. And her blouse, it had not been torn in a struggle. It had been cut, then ripped. In other words, the shirt was staged like a prop in a school play. Not only that, Amy had carefully sliced the fabric along the seam, making it easier to tear. The scissors used were never recovered, but the cut pattern told the truth. Even her injuries were theater. By now, the prosecution had a full narrative. Amy Bosley had embezzled nearly $2 million over several years from her husband's business. She intercepted IRS mail, impersonated Bob during phone calls, and orchestrated a financial illusion until the IRS demanded an in-person meeting. That meeting was scheduled for the morning of May 17, 2005, the day Bob was shot. If Bob had attended that meeting, everything would have unraveled. The missing money, the false records, the years of tax fraud. Amy's solution: kill him before he finds out. Staging a burglary was supposed to throw off police. The cut blouse and planted story were meant to seal her alibi, but the truth came from the unlikeliest place. Her children, Morgan and Trevor, they had gone to sleep peacefully. They woke to gunshots, then glass, then silence. That detail, so simple, destroyed her entire timeline. With the evidence stacked against her, Amy Bosley faced a full murder trial. But prosecutors were hesitant, not because they doubted the case, but because of the children. They would have to testify against their mother. And what kind of trauma would that unleash? So they made a decision. They offered Amy a plea deal. If she pled guilty to Bob's murder, she would receive 20 years in prison. No trial, no media frenzy. And most importantly, Morgan and Trevor would be spared from taking the stand against their own mother. Amy agreed. She never confessed out loud, never explained where the missing money went, never apologized in court. But she accepted the deal, and the town of Alexandria fell silent. On November 2, 2006, Amy Bosley walked into a Campbell County courtroom wearing a green and white prison jumpsuit. Her face was unreadable, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Then Bob's family stood. His brother, James Bosley, stared straight into Amy's eyes and said, "You are a liar, a fraud. You will one day walk free, but you will never escape what you did." His sister Deborah stepped forward, tears held back by rage. "Did he beg you to stop?" she asked. Amy said nothing. Then Bob's mother, Audrey Bosley, spoke. Her voice trembled. She read a letter, slowly, deliberately, choking through every word. My son died without saying goodbye, and my grandchildren lost both parents in one night. Amy kept her eyes on the floor. She wiped away tears, but whether those tears were for Bob or for herself, no one could say. The judge delivered the sentence, 20 years in prison. Kentucky law required her to serve 85% before parole eligibility. 17 years, no less. The gavel fell, and it was done. The story did not end in that courtroom. For years after the sentencing, people in Alexandria debated what had really driven Amy. Some blamed greed. Some blamed fear. Others whispered that Amy had been abused or pushed too far, but none of that was ever proven. No such defense was ever offered. What was clear, painfully so, was this. Amy Bosley had a way out. She could have told the truth. She could have asked for help. She could have walked away with custody, assets, dignity. But she chose murder, not a rage killing. Not a moment of passion. A quiet, calculated execution in a log cabin, with her children asleep nearby. On May 17, 2022, exactly 17 years to the day after Bob Bosley was shot to death in his own home, Amy Bosley walked out of the Kentucky Correctional Institution for Women. No media frenzy, no cameras, no news headlines, just silence. Just as she wanted, she slipped into freedom like a shadow, leaving behind a grave, 2 grown children, and a question that still burns. Why? Amy Bosley had served 17 years, the minimum required by Kentucky's sentencing guidelines. She had never admitted what happened in that bedroom, never revealed where the stolen millions went, never said Bob's name in remorse. She walked out quietly. The state had no legal reason to hold her any longer. But here's the truth. The justice system may release you from prison, but it cannot free you from memory. Every day after her release, Amy would have to live with the knowledge of what she did and of who had to pay the price. Her husband, her children, her own name. Morgan and Trevor Bosley were just kids when their mother killed their father. They were not old enough to understand trauma, but they were old enough to remember. They remembered the sounds, the timeline, the lie. After Amy's arrest, custody passed to her sister. The children were raised away from the public eye, protected, loved, and fiercely shielded from media. They never spoke publicly, and honestly, they should not have to. They lost both parents in one night. One to murder, the other to handcuffs. What more can the world ask of them? Even today, no one knows exactly what Amy Bosley did with the nearly $2 million she embezzled. It was not spent lavishly. There were no offshore accounts ever confirmed. No secret properties. No high-end jewelry trail. The money vanished. Some believe Amy hid it in cash buried or stashed away, hoping to reclaim it after prison. Others think she burned through it slowly, using shell accounts or untraceable methods. And some more cynical believe the money was never really about wealth. It was about control, about power. Because if she could not control Bob's decisions, she could control his downfall. And she did. Bob Bosley is buried at St. Stephen's Cemetery in Campbell County, Kentucky. A man remembered as generous, ambitious, and deeply human. He made mistakes. He lived big. But he loved his children and trusted his wife. That trust became his undoing. And perhaps that is the most haunting part of this story. Bob was not killed by a stranger in the night. He was killed by the person he had built a life with, the one who shared his bed, the one who sat beside him at church, the one he handed the keys to everything. This story is not just about a murder. It is about the slow erosion of truth inside a seemingly perfect home. It is about how betrayal does not always scream, it whispers. It smiles. It wears a wedding ring. Amy Bosley did not just kill her husband. She killed the illusion that success protects you, that love guarantees loyalty, that people close to us could not possibly be hiding something terrible. And yet, here we are. There is a quote often attributed to Benjamin Franklin: "Nothing is certain except death and taxes." For Bob Bosley, both came for him on the same day. And for Amy Bosley, she escaped one. but not the other.